Welcome back to Frameworks. Today we are kicking off a series on the most impactful frameworks every coach should know, starting with number 1, understanding the relationship between stimulus and adaptation. So any coach can write a workout, but great coaches understand adaptation. Today I'm going to break down the framework that separates randomness from results. We'll talk about stimulus, adaptation, dose response, and progression. You'll walk away with the tools to design programs that actually work and be able to do this over and over effectively. So let's get into it. Over the next few episodes, I'm going to break down 3 frameworks that I believe every coach just needs to know and needs to understand. And there's so many frameworks, there's dozens and dozens. I was thinking through when I had to kind of pare it down these, what are the most impactful 3? But I'm really confident in these 3, in that if a coach could just understand each of these frameworks deeply and continue to understand these frameworks deeper and deeper over time, I think that we would be in a really good place. And the first framework that we're going to talk about out of these 3 frameworks is this concept and idea of understanding how a particular stimulus equals an adaptation and how that equals training and let's just call it progress in general. Every training session should serve a purpose. So if you don't know what adaptation you're chasing, you're just guessing, right? Or we would just call this moving, which is completely fine. So in this principle, in this framework, what I want to talk about is we actually understand the outcome that we are looking for, and that outcome is measurable and it's very specific. So if you're kind of falling into that realm of just like, I train to move, that's completely fine, right? Like you've kind of graduated this concept of, I need to train for a goal. But if you're a coach, you're probably training someone or they're paying you to coach them to get to a specific goal. And hey, maybe that goal is to just, do this in their day to day and build movement and training as a habit. And I think that's awesome. But this is more so talking about if you have a very specific goal or a very specific adaptation that you are trying to get to. Okay, so the first thing that I want to talk about as we lay out this concept is the concept of general adaptation syndrome. So this is the concept that we stress something, then we recover from that stress, and then we super compensate or we compensate. Okay, so we should just understand that is general adaptation syndrome. Okay, next I want to talk about specificity. Okay, so adaptation follows the type, intensity, and frequency of whatever that stimulus is. And we'll get a little bit deeper into that once we get into specificity around, specific outcomes that you're trying to drive. And then finally, I just want to talk about progressive overload. And I think we've all probably heard of this concept or principle before, but it is a foundational concept for structural and systematic change. We do something, that something is stress, we recover, we compensate or super compensate, and then we do something again, we recover, we super compensate, and we stack those things on top of each other as we go. So that is, in a nutshell, progressive overload. And then we can start talking about what that specific stimulus is, but then we'd be getting into specificity, which we'll get into in a moment. But first, I just want to lay out those 3 principles before we get into the specific micro frameworks of this concept and idea of a stimulus driving adaptation. All right, so the first framework, and forgive me if you've heard me talk about this before, because I did dive a little bit deeper into this in a previous episode, but I can't talk about this general framework without talking about identifying the desired adaptation. So this is always going to be step number 1. Is the desired adaptation strength? Is it hypertrophy? Is it muscle endurance? Is it motor control? Is it just resilience? Okay, and then on top of that, we also have to understand what is the mechanism of that adaptation. So what do I mean by that? Is it neuromuscular? Okay, so we would call motor control neuromuscular, right? We're teaching the brain and the body or the musculature to work together to improve movement or motor learning. Strength is also neuromuscular, right? We're teaching the brain what it feels like to have this 400 pounds on our back or whatever the case is. That would be neuromuscular. Metabolic. Okay, so if we're looking at chasing muscle endurance, if we're looking at chasing hypertrophy, that might fall more on the metabolic side, right? We're giving our bodies something, a dose that is going to break down muscle tissue, or we're taking our muscles just beyond that brink of fatigue if we're working on muscle endurance, or is the adaptation that you're trying to drive technical? Okay, so technical might just be, hey, you're on the floor and you want someone to do something and you're there to improve their, how they get from point A to point B, or you're there to say, hey, I want to cue you and I want you to do this instead of that. So that would be a technical adaptation. So first, we have to identify the desire, adaptation, strength, hypertrophy, muscle endurance, motor control, resilience, all of those things. And then we have to identify what is the mechanism in which we are going to shift or change that desired adaptation. Framework number 2, we are going to prescribe the appropriate stimulus for framework 1, the adaptation that we're trying to drive. Okay, so options here. Is the appropriate stimulus load? Is it volume? Is it tempo? Is it rest intervals? Is it frequency? Is it complexity? There's a lot of things we can put under this, or variables that we can use to prescribe to, let's just call it elicit that adaptation. Okay, so load, volume, tempo, rest intervals, frequency, all of those things. Okay, we have to understand that every variable has its job, right? Every variable is kind of like a lever that we can pull to try to drive that adaptation that we are chasing in framework 1. So example here. Okay, so if we are trying to improve strength, what do we think the most important variable to adapt over time would be, right? It would definitely be load. Okay, it would be load. It could be argued that, volume can lead to increased strength. Yes. It could also be argued that we can use tempo as a variable. Yes. Rest intervals. Yeah, we need to make sure we're getting enough of it. All of those things. But load would be the number one thing that I would look at if I'm trying to get someone stronger. Okay, I'm not reinventing the wheel when I say that. If we want someone to get stronger, we need to lift more weight over time. Okay, so what is the stimulus? The stimulus is load. There's a lot of ways to do that, but it would be load. If the stimulus would be, or if the stimulus that I'm trying to drive is hypertrophy, it's going to be volume and time under tension, right? I can play with those things. But it's almost wider, right? Like now I can start looking at frequency. Okay, so how frequently am I tearing down muscle tissue, and am I recovering appropriately over time and getting enough sessions and sets and reps in to elicit maybe faster muscle growth? Okay, so a lot of variables on that one, but volume and tempo or time under tension will be the number 1 and number 2 things that I would look at. And then frequency would be a close third. Okay, if it was something like motor control or motor learning, now we're starting to talk about time under tension, but tempo more specifically. Okay, so am I controlling through that eccentric? Am I exploding on the concentric, or am I actually controlling through the concentric as well to reinforce good motor patterns? And again, we have to understand the result that we're trying to drive, or the adaptation that we're trying to drive. And that's going to determine what's appropriate, because you might hear some people where they'll say something like, never train concentrically slow because you're teaching yourself to be slow and less powerful. That has some validity if the goal and idea is to improve strength, because we want to improve explosive power through the concentric. But if we're just trying to spend a lot of time in these positions, it could be argued that going down for 4 seconds and then going up for 4 seconds times 4 to 5 reps is actually a really good rep set protocol if the goal is to increase motor control or motor learning. Terrible if it's to increase strength. So we have to prescribe the appropriate stimulus, which is so important. All right, the next framework here is that we have to match what we're giving someone to their lifestyle, but also their training age. So this is where personalization really comes into play. And this isn't hyper-personalization. We're just looking at principles and what we know to be true and what we know to be the most effective to drive the stimulus that we're looking for. Okay, so let's break down training age, for instance. Okay, so a beginner. What are we doing with beginners? No matter what their goals are, we should make sure that they have motor control, right? They can move appropriately from point A to point B. So we need to train motor control with beginners. Maybe we need to train structural balance, right? Maybe their right side is a lot stronger than their left side, or maybe their upper body is a lot more strong relatively than their lower body. So motor control, structural balance. And then when it comes to energy systems training, they're just doing a lot of aerobic base or aerobic foundation or slow, easy aerobic work. Okay, so if I'm working with a beginner and they come in and they say, hey, man, I want to get as strong as I possibly can. And I ask them to do a squat and they don't look very good moving from point A to point B. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to give them a program that is going to be focused on training motor control, training structural balance, doing some aerobic based stuff for their energy system training. And you know what's going to happen because they're a beginner? They're going to compensate, or they're going to super compensate, and they are going to adapt like crazy. Okay. I'm going to improve their motor control, right? That's the goal. But what's going to happen is they're going to put on some muscle because they haven't trained before. They're going to get stronger because they haven't lifted weights before. But the important thing is we have to let the goal be the goal. And as the coach, you have to identify what the most important thing is. And then there's going to be kind of like a sprawling effect where there's going to be things outside of what you're focusing on that are going to improve. So beginner, motor control, structural balance, aerobic base. Intermediate. So when you're working with an intermediate, it's almost like, you can do anything with them. You can train some strength, you can train some hypertrophy, you can train some motor control, you can train some muscle endurance. You can kind of train everything because now they've earned the right to dig deep into their nervous system, right? They can actually, lift enough weight in that squat where it actually becomes challenging through that concentric motion. So with an intermediate, open up the floodgates. Now you can do whatever you want to do with them because now they have the ability and capabilities to do that in resistance training. Now we get into energy systems training. You're still doing some aerobic based stuff, but now you might be doing some aerobic peak or aerobic power work as well. And then you might be touching some anaerobics if it's appropriate. But even if the goal for a beginner is to improve, for whatever reason they want to improve their anaerobic system, you probably shouldn't do that because they're not strong enough to do it yet. Okay. So train, build some foundational strength, build a nice aerobic base. And then when they get to that intermediate phase, now start having conversations around maybe touching some anaerobics. Okay. And then the advanced, the nervous system in the advanced individual is able to become very stressed. Okay. Because they are capable. So this can be dangerous, and it's really easy to overtrain an advanced individual. That's why we always say a beginner should do a lot of accumulation work, intermediate, some accumulation, intensification, and then advanced. They're training like that beginner again, where they're doing mostly accumulation because intensification just crushes them, right? So with the advanced individual, you can actually do anything, but just be careful that you don't give the advanced individual too much without enough rest and that ability to remember, stress, recover, and then compensate. Now, when it comes to implementing these three frameworks, you have to understand that there is a massive difference between fatigue and stimulus. Okay, so what is fatigue? Fatigue is just getting someone tired. Okay, giving them a training session, giving them a stimulus, right? A quote unquote stimulus to make them really tired. And then they're going to have to adapt to something, of course, but we don't know what that adaptation is going to lead to. So in this definition of fatigue versus stimulus, a stimulus is a guided fatigue, right? A guided stressor. Because remember that framework, we stress and then we recover and adapt and then we compensate. Okay. So we just have to make sure that the fatigue that we're giving people is pointed and we're doing it for a reason so that that adaptation is more likely to end up where we want it to end up. But we have to admit, when we coach people and we give them work, these are just educated guesses. We are never going to get it 100% right 100% of the time. Okay. But set yourself up for a better likelihood of success by understanding what the stimulus is that you're giving them. Also understand how to use those variables like tempo and rest and sets and reps and exercise selection, all of those things to actually lead to the stimulus that you're looking for. And my best advice to you is to understand where they're at, what they're capable of, and what they're responding well to over time. And then that brings me to like having a system and understanding where someone is and if they're getting better or not, right? So I use and we've used CoachRx for a while now. And what CoachRx allows us to do, it allows us to put all of these pieces together. It allows us to track clients' progress and training over time while staying very looped in with where they're at, what they're doing. And it's just a seamless process of, I consult with you, we build a plan inside of the platform, I put that plan into place very seamlessly, and I see what this plan is actually doing over time, and then we make adjustments as needed. So just have a system. I'd recommend jumping in CoachRx and using that if you don't have a coaching platform already. And if you do, what are you waiting for? Just move over to CoachRx, okay? And then I want to close this with just a couple questions that I would ask yourself as you design your training programs for all of your clients, okay? Number one, what is the primary adaptation this client needs right now, okay? So what is the primary adaptation? Because there's a lot of things that we can go out and chase, but we have to understand what is the primary adaptation that I'm chasing right now, and am I doing that effectively? Number two, does each part of their program point to this? Or better said, does each part of the training program not interfere with what you're looking for? So just a really simple example, and a mistake that I see a lot is coaches that are just looking for too much adaptation at the same time. So a good example of this would be like, hey, I'm doing 8 hours of, moderate aerobic work per week, but I'm also trying to get strong. So I'm doing doubles, triples at percentages and the squat, bench, deadlift, right? Those things are going to interfere. So just make sure that each part of the program points to the adaptation that we're looking for. And then number three, can they repeat this next week and progress upon what they just did? Okay, so think about those things. Look at those when you look at all of your training programs. When you're starting to think about this framework of, I give someone a stimulus and it equals a very specific adaptation. If we can just understand this at a simple level, it will make creating any program so much easier. Okay, so that's going to do it for this first framework. Tune in and we will talk about framework number 2.